In 1999, Hollywood was heating up with the rising popularity of comic book film adaptations after the release and massive success of Blade in 1998. But with Marvel having sold the film rights to the majority of their most popular IP to the highest bidders in Tinseltown, it was only a matter of time before box offices boomed with live adaptations of our favorite comic book heroes. Blade's success showed moviegoers that the days of camp and lighthearted adventures were gone, and the age of black leather and darker characters was upon us.
What would you prefer? Yellow spandex?
This caused executives at Fox to dig into their own treasure trove of Marvel IP and make plans to bring their own super-powered adventure to the big screen. But with comic book movies still not having found their identity in live-action cinema, studios were searching for the right crew to helm the massive undertaking of Hollywood's next superhero blockbuster, X-Men. But how did these outsiders go from the pages of Marvel to holding on to a more than 20-year stretch of fandom that is widely regarded and beloved by many moviegoers to this day? Find out in today's episode of Marvel Revisited. Mutants were first introduced into the Marvel family in the summer of 1963, with their first appearance being in a self-titled series known simply as The X-Men by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Stan Lee had said that he wanted to introduce a new super team in the Marvel Universe, but didn't want to write individual backstories for each character explaining how they got their powers. Stan's answer to this was to create mutants. Mutants are superpowered humans, but instead of radioactive spider bites or gamma radiation, mutants are born gifted and their powers are genetic. This certainly allows a special advantage with the X-Men in that you don't have to explain each character's origin, and that makes it easy to introduce mass amounts of characters, which is clear based on the hundreds of characters that have joined Xavier's school of gifted youngsters over the years. The X-Men comic books started circulating in the summer of 1963, and while originally fans were interested in the adventures of these superpowered misfits, they weren't the hit with readers that Marvel was expecting. This led to the original run of the X-Men comic being canceled in 1970, only to be revamped in 1973 with Chris Claremont as the new project lead. This shot the X-Men into the stratosphere and became one of Marvel's most recognizable and successful comic book franchises. In the mid-1980s, a screenplay for a live-action X-Men film was written by Marvel's Jerry Conway and Roy Thomas for Orion Pictures. The film seemed promising, but in the late 1980s, Orion ran into some financial issues which caused production on the film to halt. Then in the early 90s, Stan Lee and X-Men figurehead Chris Claremont began talks with Carol Co. Pictures on a new X-Men film to be directed by Catherine Bigelow, who had established a name for herself as a director with films like Near Dark and Blue Steel. At one point, James Cameron was even attached to the project as a producer, but that would fall apart when Stan Lee reportedly inspired Cameron to pursue his aspirations of directing Spider-Man. The original treatment included many elements that would eventually come to fruition in the film, and after the success of the X-Men animated series, the film rights to X-Men were sold to Fox, who already owned the cartoon. This led to Fox beginning development on the long-awaited and so far unlucky X-Men live-action film. Thank you for visiting JoBlo. If you like the show, please like, also subscribe and enable notifications so you don't miss anything. Let's get back to the show. In 1996, the film's development was tortured with problems and a lot of people getting attached to the project only to walk away before shooting for any number of issues occurring during the development. But after years of nightmarish efforts to get this movie made, Bryan Singer was eventually signed on to adapt a screenplay written by Tom DeSanto and David Hayter, and it was finally time to cast our X-Men. Fox's original casting choice for Wolverine was Misfits frontman Glenn Danzig, who producers thought had the right look and build for a comic book accurate Wolverine. However, Danzig declined to audition due to the dreaded scheduling conflicts with his band.
You're not part of the group.
Producers also sought actors like Russell Crowe and Doug Ray Scott, but were ultimately sold on a friend of Russell Crowe's, an unknown Australian actor by the name of Hugh Jackman. Jackman was actually the last person cast in the film, which is ironic considering that Hugh Jackman has appeared as Wolverine in more of the franchise's films than any other character. Patrick Stewart was always Singer's first choice for Professor X, though funnily enough, the king of pop, Michael Jackson himself, was actively pursuing the role.
Just feel it.
Nobody took him seriously. James Marsden was completely unaware of any of Cyclops' defining character traits, but did study the comic books and said he wanted to bring a Boy Scout approach to the character. Actress Anna Paquin was originally scheduled to star in Tart, but she dropped out in order to play Rogue, the very first mutant that we saw in cinema. She nailed the performance, and it's a shame that we saw less and less of her as the movies went on. Singer had previously worked with cinema legend Sir Ian McKellen on Apt Pupil, and he was Singer's first choice as the big bad of this movie, Magneto.
Is that what they say?
We also get the talented and iconic Halle Berry as Storm and Famke Janssen as Jean Grey, who's just come off of the release of Faculty. The cast of this movie feels really nostalgic, as many of these characters have gone on to have huge success in other roles, but at the time some of these people were fresh faces in Hollywood, and it's great to see where some of them got their big breakout performances. The story introduces us to mutants in a very interesting way. Instead of a heroic action sequence or epic swelling music, the movie depicts the trauma of these mutants. We follow Rogue as she's on the run away from home after nearly killing her boyfriend. She makes it out of town and into a small dive hangout where a cage-fighting mutant by the name of the Wolverine is using his skills to make money doing this. Rogue feels alone and isolated on her journey until a bar fight breaks out, and we get to witness the very first time that Wolverine pops his claws in live action, which gives audiences chills to this day. For audiences, this is the definitive version of Wolverine, and it's absolutely incredible that Hugh Jackman's career as Wolverine would go on to become the most highly regarded of any of the X-Men franchise, and after seeing his initial introduction, fans knew that this character was going to be the one we wanted to follow. After sneaking into Logan's truck trying to hitch a ride, Rogue and Logan hit the road together, and we get a chance to really see that bond between these two people grow. The believability of Rogue and Logan's dynamic is instant, which makes it even more disappointing that we don't see more of their relationship in the subsequent films. The first real action sequence of this movie happens very early on in the film, which speaks to the overall pacing of this movie. It's here where we're introduced to more of the movie's important characters, both good and bad. The Brotherhood of Mutants are the primary antagonists of this film, and we get to meet one of them early as they attempt to kidnap Logan and Rogue for reasons to be discovered. It's here that we meet Sabretooth. No, not that Sabretooth, this one. This is what comes to most fans' minds when they think of the character in live action, and for good reason. Tyler Mane has made himself a career out of playing scary and physically intimidating characters, and Sabretooth is just that, scary and intimidating. Just before Sabretooth can nab our protagonist, we're introduced to Cyclops, James Marsden, Storm, played by Halle Berry, and Jean Grey, played by Famke Janssen. Audiences got to see their first big X-Men spectacle with a rescue mission that showcases the abilities of the core team right away and in a manner that makes sense to the story. This is something that the movie definitely deserves praise for, as not only were comic book movies still unknown territory, but superhero team-up movies were even more taboo in Hollywood. But this film made us believe in the potential of movies like Avengers and the Eternals. Cyclops, Storm, and Jean bring an incapacitated Logan and Rogue back to the X-Mansion, where Hugh Jackman really gets a chance to shine as the character of Wolverine as he wakes up from being knocked out but has to kind of navigate and hunt his way out. However, before he can find Rogue and escape, Professor X gets Logan to hear him out. It's very interesting to revisit this movie and see Hugh Jackman's first take on Wolverine and see how it contrasts from his final appearance as Wolverine in Logan. This movie really leans on the political side too, which some fans see as an absolute necessity in any form of X-Men media, but others say is stale. However, at the time, the concept was fresh and it made for a believable existence for mutants and the need for Xavier's team of gifted heroes. See, the movie establishes early on that mutants are feared and made to feel foreign. Xavier's mission is to give a safe space to mutants to learn to control their powers and use them for good. He ultimately wants mutants to coexist with humans without fear.
It's a war. It's the reason people like me exist.
Meanwhile, we have the Brotherhood of Mutants, which is led by Magneto. Magneto is both an enemy but also a childhood friend of Xavier, and his whole motivation is to achieve equality for mutants by turning everyone in New York into mutants, which would therefore force them to empathize and adopt the mutant race. Magneto's Brotherhood consists of Sabretooth, Mystique, and Toad, who is equal parts creepy and fascinating. This movie's true conflict is that both parties want to achieve the same goal but have two very different and extreme methods. The characters reflect that in that the Brotherhood is underground and the team is unpolished and scrappy and dimly lit, where Xavier's team is organized and brightly lit. The movie has a nice layer to it where it almost seems like the entire Cold War that's happening between mutants and humans sometimes feels like it boils down to a rivalry between just Professor X and Magneto. All the while, we have our second antagonist, Senator Kelly, who's advocating against mutants and doesn't believe in mutant rights. The character is interesting because he's a mutual enemy of both the X-Men and the Brotherhood. When Senator Kelly is kidnapped by Mystique, Magneto forcefully mutates him, giving him a unique ability of his own, which was a mistake as Kelly's ability allowed him to turn himself into a gelatinous blob who could squeeze through the bars of his cell window and escape.
What the hell have you done to me?
Senator, this is pointless. Where would you go? Who would take you in now that you're one of us?
This was an important moment for the film. Senator Kelly reluctantly seeks the help of the X-Men, hoping to remain out of the public eye until he can figure out what to do. Unfortunately for Kelly, his mutation doesn't seem to be stable as this happens. Yikes. This sets our X-Men, now joined by Wolverine, on an epic battle with the Brotherhood as Magneto is staging a massive undertaking by kidnapping Rogue in order to use her abilities to power a device that will mutate the entire state of New York. With the Brotherhood working security, the X-Men need to work together to save Rogue and prevent an entire part of the country from being mutated and killed. The narrative of this movie is fairly familiar in today's superhero market. We have two sets of mutants with almost everything in common except for their ultimate goals. Charles and the X-Men want peace and coexistence with humans, while Magneto and the Brotherhood want to turn everybody into mutants, which would abolish the hierarchy of anti-mutant politics. The thing that really shines through in this movie is that Professor X isn't a gleaming hero in peak physical condition, and Magneto isn't a mustache-twirling bad guy who just wants to take over the world. In a way, it's a story about two old friends whose abilities and ambitions led them to opposing sides of the same coin. Cyclops, Storm, Jean, and Wolverine show up and battle their way through Toad, Mystique, and Sabretooth, only to be captured by Magneto and subdued from saving Rogue. The final battle of this film wowed fans as we got to witness 8 mutants using the full extent of their abilities to fight each other, and it really makes for quite the spectacle. The special effects used to recreate the Statue of Liberty, as well as the beautiful display of superpowers, had the audiences saying,
Holy shit.
We also get a fair amount of comic book lore and foreshadowing for later installments of the film in the final battle. As Wolverine is throwing down with Sabretooth in order to get to Magneto, he's knocked off the side of the Statue of Liberty and he stabs his claws into the wall to keep from falling, and his claws pop into the wall directly between Cyclops and Jean, referencing Logan's growing interference in the relationship between Jean and Scott.
Stay away from my girl.
We also get a quick explanation for Rogue getting her iconic white streak in her hair. This is something that X-Men comic book fans were excited to see, as many would say that without the white streak, there is no Rogue.
We love what you've done with your hair.
Hey.
I'm sure somebody said that. Although this isn't the only Easter egg we see in the final battle, it is a nice way to introduce the more comic accurate look for Rogue.
I kind of like it.
The ending of this film definitely sets up for a sequel, but also sets a solo Wolverine adventure that would eventually be explored later in the franchise. X-Men went into production in mid-1999 in Toronto and Hamilton, Ontario, and the filmmakers did a really good job of making it feel like upstate New York, and even included the Statue of Liberty as the battleground for their final battle sequence. The action in this movie is a lot of fun, though it is criticized widely for being a bit too reliant on audiences' suspense of disbelief. A lot of the fight sequences were seen as mediocre, but the film still receives praise to this day for the revolutionary design and makeup work for Rebecca Romaine Stamos as Mystique. According to the filmmakers, she had to wear over 100 individual prosthetics for this role. The actress has admitted that it was not a good time for her getting into costume, and even said that she spent 6 hours a day in the makeup chair. The movie was released at a time where CGI was definitely being more widely adopted in cinema, and in order to understand how to shoot the massive action sequences for this film, Singer had to visit sets of films like Titanic and Star Wars Episode 1 to see how studios used the CGI and green screen effects. In revisiting the X-Men, the CGI is pretty great, specifically on Senator Kelly after he gets mutated and morphs into a big jellyfish. The film was received well by fans, bringing in a worldwide box office total of $296.3 million off of just a $75 million budget. The good luck for this once seemingly cursed film doesn't stop there, as the movie also saw a huge payday after the DVD and video release. The success of this movie would garner demand for a sequel, which Singer was also hired to direct, despite having many reports of the director arriving late to the set, as well as demonstrating frequent mood swings and excessive use of painkillers on set.
You're a dick.
The film received positive reviews from critics and fans, and the anticipation for the sequel was high. Fans weren't sure where the story would go next, but all of us looked forward to more mutants, more superpowered spectacles, more Wolverine, and of course, more X-Men. Overall, X-Men is a wonderful film, and the story and plot for the time were fresh and a lot of fun to watch. The action was acceptable, and the special effects still hold up. The performances and cast of heroes and villains were entertaining, and they were genuinely making the best movie they could in a genre that was still looking for its identity. Of course, there are many more movies in the Marvel catalog for us to revisit, so we will be seeing many of these wonderful characters again. With the newfound hype for comic book movies in the early 2000s, studios immediately saw the potential of these movies and began ordering screenplays for all of their comic book IP, things like Fantastic Four, Daredevil, and Spider-Man. Do those movies hold up to today's standards? Well, I guess we'll have to find out in the next episode of Marvel Revisited. When we first revisited X-Men, comic book movies were far from being bankable box office blockbusters. But by the year 2003, superhero action films were bringing audiences into cinemas across the world, and it was time for our favorite live-action comic book movies to get sequels.
Welcome back.
While some sequels in Hollywood have definitely left a lot to be desired, there are a few among them that take the original film's spirit and elevate it into something new, something better. Is this one of those sequels? Find out in today's episode of Marvel Revisited. After the success of Fox's darker take on mutants in X-Men 2000, it was immediately decided that a follow-up film would begin development with plans for a summer 2003 release date. Bryan Singer, pre-disgraced, returned to direct and adapt a screenplay written by Michael Dougherty, David Hayter, and Dan Harris. The film's story was based on many comic book stories, but the outline was specifically cited as being based off of X-Men: God Loves, Man Kills by Chris Claremont. Because of the short time frame between films, the studio was also able to get back the core cast for another round of super-powered shenanigans. Hugh Jackman had risen from being a mostly unknown face in Hollywood to being fans' definitive version of Wolverine, and the screenwriters were happy to give Jackman another big role in the sequel. Of course, this would also make audiences happy, as Wolverine is considered to be the most beloved of all of the X-Men in this franchise.
But, you know nothing, little man.
Halle Berry returned as Storm, despite having a less than stellar experience working on the first one. It was said after shooting the film that Berry would frequently vomit on set due to the wire work required for her flying scenes. This is apparent as we see even less flying from Storm in this movie. James Marsden, Famke Janssen, and Anna Paquin are back as well, and Cyclops got a little bit of a visor upgrade. Or downgrade, look at this tiny thing. We also get Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, and Rebecca Romijn back to continue the ongoing tension between the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Mutants. For this film, writers wanted to add more recognizable mutants from the comics and write them in alongside our heroes. The character of Nightcrawler was added, and famous character actor Alan Cumming was cast for the role, beating out Ethan Embry at the last minute and easily stole the show with his debut in this movie. Man, I still like that scene, and I'm sure you're enjoying this video. Make sure you hit the like button and subscribe for the best in movie content. Other characters like Pyro and Lady Deathstrike were also added to the script, and both of them really got a chance to show off their mutant abilities in this movie. The movie starts with some exposition to catch audiences up on mutants and the ongoing conflict between them and non-powered humans who fear them. The voiceover is provided by Patrick Stewart, and only he could make it sound so grand.
Sharing the world has never been humanity's defining attribute.
Then we enter my personal favorite scene in this entire film, the introduction to Nightcrawler. This scene is pure entertainment as we see a mysterious man in a trench coat and flesh-tone makeup as he quietly enters the White House for a museum tour. He sneaks off towards the Oval Office where we see this happen. The filming of this scene was exhaustive for the entire crew and actors, and the effort was greatly appreciated by fans as this first look at Nightcrawler in live-action form had audiences around the globe interested in the story that was about to unfold. Nightcrawler brawls and teleports through the Secret Service and nearly assassinates the president before being shot in the arm and fleeing before finishing the job. Now we transition to the payoff to Logan's adventure from the end of the first film. It's not so much a payoff, but more of a quick green screen shot to give Logan a reason to return to the group at the X-Mansion. The scene is harmless, but definitely not much of a satisfying reason to get the band back together, if you know what I mean. Meanwhile, we check back in with the rest of the core team, Cyclops, Jean Grey, and Storm. They're on sort of a field trip with the younger students from Xavier's school, and the team is sort of chaperoning. It isn't long before Jean starts losing control of her powers right there in the mall and hearing the thoughts of every single person inside. She tells Scott that she's been having nightmares and slowly losing her ability to control the raw power of her abilities. Something that seems to be setting up a certain epic comic book story that we would later see adapted into live action. Badly. Twice. Storm comes by and this time doesn't have her Kenyan accent, which she carried in the first film. This is honestly a small continuity error compared to the mass of plot holes that would come up throughout the timeline of these movies. Now it's time to check in with the younger students, and we enter a scene where Rogue, played again by Anna Paquin, Bobby, played again by Shawn Ashmore, and John, aka Pyro, a new character in the movies, but a beloved villain from the comics, played here by Aaron Stanford. Shawn Ashmore must have been jealous of those fire powers because years later we saw Ashmore play Lamplighter in the Amazon Prime hit The Boys.
What the f*** are you laughing at?
The teens are being lightly harassed by some mallgoers when John decides to take things a few steps too far and uses his ability to control the fire to light up one of the bullies using a lit cigarette. Before any major conflicts arise, we notice that every non-mutant in the mall has become completely still while the X-Men are all able to move freely. Enter Professor X.
Next time you feel like showing off, don't.
Charles freezes everyone to take kind of a teaching moment with Pyro, but the team learns the news of a mutant attack on the White House and the X-Men are immediately on the case. But not as quickly as the movie's villain, William Stryker. Does this name sound familiar? Yeah, we see a lot of this character throughout the X-Men franchise. But this is the first appearance, and he's established in this movie as a well-connected special ops agent / scientist with years of experience in mutant policy. He also clearly despises mutants, and the dialogue of this scene makes it very obvious. While Stryker is discussing his plan to invade Xavier's school in order to, quote, investigate the assassin who attempted to kill the president, we see another familiar face. Senator Kelly from the first film returns. Kind of. See, Senator Kelly died in the last film, but at the end it was revealed that Mystique had been impersonating him in order to help her cause for mutant rights from the inside. Stryker and Kelly, but really Mystique, argue about the methods Stryker wants to implement to his investigation. Kelly is fighting for mutant rights, and Stryker is seemingly perfectly at ease with starting a war. This is interesting because the movie is kind of setting up a common enemy between the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Mutants. Back at the X-Mansion, Logan is returning from his spirit quest, and he is greeted by Rogue and introduced to Bobby, aka...
Call me Iceman.
Storm tells Logan that they need him to babysit while Jean and Storm head to Boston to look for the assassin. Of course, they know where to find him thanks to Professor X and his ability to use Cerebro to locate mutants. Now it's time to check in with our favorite X-Men frenemy, Magneto, played again by Ian McKellen.
How long can we keep this up?
How long is your sentence?
Forever.
Magneto is visited by Stryker, who's also looking for Nightcrawler, who enters Magneto's plastic prison and gives him some kind of truth serum that makes Magneto essentially unable to resist obeying Stryker. Stryker hopes to use this advantage to get information about Xavier's School for the Gifted. Mystique breaks into Stryker's office and uses his computer to locate Magneto's plastic prison in order to help him escape, and the game is afoot.
The war has begun.
Storm and Jean arrive at a church and find Nightcrawler. He explains he doesn't really remember the attempt to assassinate the president and has no memory of anything that happened before that. Storm and Jean notice a raw burn on the back of Nightcrawler's neck, which matches the one from Magneto when Stryker was controlling him. This of course is leading the audience to believe that Stryker is behind the assassination attempt. Jeez, this guy really hates mutants. So Storm and Jean are headed back, Logan is at home with the kids, and Cyclops goes with Professor X to visit Magneto and see what he knows. It's here where we learn that Stryker's motivation is actually deeply personal. Turns out Stryker's son is not only a mutant, but a highly dangerous one that used to go to Charles's school. Magneto reveals that he told Stryker everything about the school and Cerebro. At this point, the movie is begging for some action, which gets satisfied by seeing Cyclops get his ass kicked by Lady Deathstrike and Charles being held captive. And then we get the famous mansion invasion scene.
All right.
Oh yeah. This scene also features a version of the fan favorite Wolverine ability, the Berserker attack.
Let's go.
This was a huge crowd pleaser for audiences and fans of the comics, as the Berserker Rage is as synonymous with Wolverine as playing cards are to Gambit. The entire scene is really intense and they really want you to feel the stakes of the invasion. Wolverine is able to get a handful of mutants out of the school and escapes to Boston with Rogue, Pyro, and Iceman to hide out and contact Charles, not knowing that he's currently unavailable. Stryker breaks into Cerebro and steals all the parts he needs to rebuild his own version of it elsewhere. Then a quick check-in with Mystique as she uses her human form to seduce Magneto's prison guard and then inject him with liquid iron. This of course will be more than useful to Magneto as he uses it to later kill the guard and escape from prison. We now see that Professor X is under the captivity of Stryker, and the scene's dialogue is meant to provide some more exposition to Stryker's history with mutants. We basically learn that Stryker's son Jason was a mutant who went to Charles's school, but was returned home because his mutation was so severe that even Professor X couldn't help him control it. Jason would bitterly haunt his parents' minds with his powers as revenge for his mutation, which led to the eventual suicide of Stryker's wife. So Stryker's ultimate motivation is revealed, and his plan is to use his new Cerebro while powering it with the abilities of his son, who is revealed to be alive and basically completely vegetable as he's been operated on and sedated by Stryker. He wants to use his son's abilities to affect the minds of every living mutant and genocide them all in one single effort. Big bad guy shit. Logan, Rogue, Iceman, and Pyro are hiding out at Bobby's parents' house in Boston, but when Bobby comes out as a mutant to his family, his little brother doesn't take the news well and decides to call the police and report a mutant threat. This sends Storm and Jean to rescue Logan and the kids, which they do, only to get into a pretty intense jet fight with the military before being intercepted, yet saved, by Magneto and Mystique.
When will these people learn how to fly?
I love that this story forces the Brotherhood and the X-Men to trust and rely on each other to defeat a common enemy. It kind of thickens the ongoing drama between sides, and for me, it makes the movie a lot more interesting. So the team is still spread out, but we're starting to see them slowly coming together. The core team, currently consisting of Wolverine, Magneto, Mystique, Bobby, Rogue, Pyro, Storm, and Jean, are camping out in the woods and briefing each other on the situation and making their plan.
Oh, hello.
During this retreat in the woods, Mystique tricks Logan into making out with her by pretending to be Jean, and Magneto makes a forward attempt to recruit Pyro to the Brotherhood. These conflicts definitely made for an entertaining break in the main plot before the big finale. Back at base, Professor X is still being held captive as Stryker is using Jason and his new makeshift Cerebro to locate all of Earth's mutants and execute them. When the team arrives to save the day, they send Mystique in disguised as Wolverine to gain entry to the base, only to immediately start kicking ass and spreading out looking for Charles. While in the base, Mystique is able to lock Stryker out of the control room, and he is now running through the base looking for an escape. Cyclops pops back up after being absent for most of the movie and is currently under the mind control of Stryker, and as such is trying to kill his friends.
This is one lover's quarrel we cannot get involved in, my dear.
But Jean snaps him out of it, only to be left injured by the fight and causing an accidental hole in the dam that the base is built on. This, not good. Wolverine finds Stryker, but doesn't get a chance to talk to him because Lady Deathstrike shows up to give Logan a bitter taste of his own medicine. This fight scene took takes upon takes to get right, but a lot of the editing undermined the effort by using so many quick cuts. It's still an awesome scene, and Wolverine wins the fight. Nightcrawler and Storm rescue some kid mutants that were captured during the raid and eventually find Charles. Storm has to save Charles by using her powers to essentially freeze Jason to death so that he can't control Professor X and cause illusions. This works, but now the base is flooding with water and everyone is facing certain death. Logan catches up with Stryker and the conversation sort of hints at Wolverine's Weapon X origins, something that we will be exploring soon, and I'm just so thrilled.
Oh, that's funny. You're still so funny, Logan.
Logan leaves Stryker for dead and catches up with the team. They all make it safely back to the jet, only to find that Pyro has escaped with Magneto and Mystique, presumably to join the Brotherhood. The jet isn't working from a near-fatal blast to the back of it during the jet fight, and Jean makes the incredibly bold and seemingly snap decision to use her powers to lift the plane while holding back the water flow from drowning everyone. She's able to save the entire crew, but only at the cost of her own life. This scene was much more emotional this time around than I remembered it being. James Marsden really plays up the intense emotion, and it is believable. Much more subtle is Logan's equally sad, albeit more composed reaction. This is some good acting. Well done, boys. So, Stryker is dead, the mutant race is safe, and the team has mostly survived, barring the tragic loss of Jean Grey. We end the film with a warning from mutants to the president that there are powerful forces attempting to start a war, and then a final piece of dialogue from Jean that sets up audiences for one of the most famous storylines in X-Men comic book history, the Dark Phoenix.
Estoy tirando la basura. Garbage.
I don't remember finding the third film in this franchise particularly good, but I must say that this film was much more solid than I remember. When rewatching it, I constantly found myself engaging in the story and characters for what was a mostly pleasant and entertaining ride. X-Men opened on May 2nd, 2003 to an astounding $407 million worldwide box office take off of just a $110 million budget. The movie would hold the #1 spot at the box office for 2 consecutive weeks before the release of Shrek 2, another sequel that audiences couldn't wait for in 2003. I find that this movie really shines in some of the writing, and the heavy themes mixed in with the eye candy and spectacle of superpowers on display is just great. But what this film really did was set an incredibly high bar for what would be the next installment of the captivating saga, X-Men: The Last Stand. But Fox wanted to cash in on the Marvel hype while they were working on the new X-Men, and in between they would give us a new kind of supergroup, a fantastic group. But was that any good? I guess we'll find out next time on Marvel Revisited. For years, Hollywood has tried relentlessly to bring to life the exciting and diverse team dynamic of one of Marvel's most iconic and best-selling comic book franchises, the X-Men. With 11 live-action films, 13 if you count the Deadpool movies, which we kind of have to, and billions of studio dollars given to them over the years, you'd think that we'd have covered the best stories from the pages and brought them into cinema. And while I think there are plenty of good moments hidden in these movies, and some movies in the franchise that are beyond expectations, I also think that the true potential of the X-Men and their complicated interpersonal nuance has yet to be fully realized on the big screen. That's not to say that I don't enjoy movies like the original X-Men and First Class, and of course Logan, which is easily the most bleak and disturbing film that Fox has ever made with Jackman as Wolverine. And maybe it's just my generation, but when I think of X-Men, I think of the soapy and dramatic cartoon series from 1997, which shaped my obsession with mutants and their stories as a young comic book fan. And that makes today's movie slightly more disappointing, as we're about to revisit a film that takes one of Marvel's most iconic comic book events and makes a bold attempt to bring it to reality with the Dark Phoenix saga. Nope, not that one. This one.
A personality that in our sessions came to call itself the Phoenix.
Now, I'm personally a pretty big fan of the character of Jean Grey and the Phoenix, but my love for the character and her duality of good and evil exists only in print, as I don't think this storyline can be done justly in just one film. After all, the comic book and the cartoon dedicated multiple books and episodes to this arc, and for very good reason. It's it's complicated. But at the end of the day, X-Men The Last Stand is about much more than just Jean. It's a movie about loss, intolerance, rebellion, and the ever-growing longing for mutants to be accepted among humans. And also it features some classic in-universe plot holes that make the entire experience very difficult to take as canon.
I don't have to explain myself. Least of all to you.
Seriously, why do these movies have such a hard time keeping their story straight? Like, am I missing something? So, if you're ready, then grab your black leather jumpsuit and don't forget to like the video, because we are about to enter the danger room and revisit X-Men: The Last Stand. Okay, true believers, we're at the end of the original X-Men trilogy. If you saw our videos revisiting the last two films, you'll know that I'm a pretty big fan of the first film and not as big a fan of the second film. And in 2006, when this installment was released, I was expecting to see something more groundbreaking as a result of the rapid advancement of special effects in Hollywood and the increasingly experienced cast of celebrities who inhabit the roles. But instead, what we got is a bloated story that is packed to the brim with storylines that try to tie off the series with as little loose ends as possible. After the success of X-Men and the boom in comic book movies, it was inevitable that X-Men would continue its run in cinema with a second and third film. But when the director of the original films, Bryan Singer, chose to leave the project in favor of Superman Returns, Fox was at a standstill on how to end his trilogy. So they went to Matthew Vaughn, the director of Kick-Ass, Kingsman, and First Class. And he wasn't available. So instead, they got Rush Hour director Brett Ratner to step in to direct. Was this a mistake? Yeah.
What have I done?
But they also considered talent like Darren Aronofsky and Joss Whedon to take the helm. Poor Aronofsky just can't catch a break with superhero movies, can he? But after some development issues and having studio interference in full swing before even hiring an official director, the movie's writing was doomed from the very beginning.
Really? I doubt that.
When the idea to bring the Phoenix Saga into the script was presented, Fox felt like it was too dark for a fun summer blockbuster and they scrapped the idea. It wasn't until later that it was watered down by subsequent unrelated plot lines and then it was approved to be in the story. And that just has the studio's lack of understanding of the X-Men written all over it.
I don't want to play games with you. I want answers. You don't want to play games with me?
Like I said, doomed. X-Men: The Last Stand is the third film in the original trilogy and picks up shortly after the events of the second film. The last time we saw the X-Men, they were struggling to save the day but just narrowly escaping a watery grave, with Jean Grey making the ultimate sacrifice to save her friends.
She's gone.
No! You don't say that! We gotta go back.
She's gone.
No!
The Last Stand uses those events to motivate the story while also trying to build up to an epic final showdown between the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Mutants and the US government. And I don't want to speak for everyone, but honestly, the government is completely out of whack in these movies. Nobody seems to have anything to say except mutant bad and human good, which would be fine if this wasn't the basis for literally everything that's happening in this whole trilogy. Xavier and the core team, Cyclops, Wolverine, and Storm, are grieving the death of Jean and each character is handling it differently. But when Jean returns, she comes back different, darker. And upon her return, she's recruited by Magneto to lead the new Brotherhood on a fight for their freedom by destroying the government and their newfound, quote, cure for mutation. The X-Men need to band together one more time to save the day and bring Jean back from the dark path she's taken as the Phoenix.
Don't let it control you.
To set the story in motion, we get some flashbacks to the past and plenty of exposition to try rushing Jean's never-before-mentioned duality.
You have more power than you can imagine, Jean. The question is, will you control that power?
It's so frustrating, but it gets worse. Charles and Eric visit a suburban home, and we see that Charles still has full use of his legs. They're trying to recruit Jean to their school for gifted mutants, and successfully persuade her and her parents. Now, first we need to address the 2006 CGI de-aging attempt that director Brett Ratner decided to go with. Here's a hot take. It doesn't look that much different than Marvel's de-aging technology today.
That depends if you think it's a poor attempt to replicate my work.
Even for this group, that takes nerve.
For real, I mean, maybe they've enhanced it for HD on Disney Plus, which would not be surprising, but it honestly isn't terrible. I mean, sure, it's a bit rubbery and overly smooth, but let's face it, that's just how Marvel movies look. I also think it's important to remember that the Phoenix has never been mentioned in these movies before, which makes the attempt to shoehorn it into this movie even more sad. For context, this is an entire saga in the X-Men comics and had a 5-episode arc in the cartoon, which was fully dedicated to that one story, as opposed to this movie which tries to balance the arc of Jean with a million other spinning plates. Things like a mutant cure, a war between man and mutant, a love triangle with Iceman, Rogue, and Shadowcat for some reason, and of course the incredible sibling-like rivalry between Magneto and Professor X. And that last one I actually love.
Charles Xavier did more for mutants than you'll ever know. Our single greatest regret is that he had to die for our dream to live.
We also get an introduction to an iconic X-Men member from the original comics, Archangel, or Angel, played here by the underappreciated Ben Foster. Haven't we seen him and Rebecca Romijn in another Marvel movie before? I actually love this scene where we see a young Angel locked in the bathroom trying to surgically remove his angel wings before his father finds out that he's a mutant. It's heartbreaking, and yet it shows the current state of fear-mongering against mutants in this reality. And also, it sets up Angel's father as the man who's motivated to develop a cure. Scott isn't doing well after the loss of Jean. He's not teaching his classes at the school, he's not joining them for missions, and he's definitely not up for any of Logan's antics.
Not everybody heals as fast as you, Logan.
When he goes to the lake where Jean died, he senses her presence through telepathic communication, and then, a whopping like 15 minutes into the movie, he dies. That's it. He just dies. That's what happens. Cyclops just dies.
Tell me what happened to him.
So now Jean is back at the X-Mansion, where Charles attempts to free her from her murderous tendencies and bring her back to the Jean Grey that we all know and love. Charles gives Logan some exposition explaining that he's known about Jean's dark side since the very beginning, and he didn't think to tell anybody about this? Meanwhile, Bobby Drake, played here by Shawn Ashmore, is caught in a love triangle with his longtime girlfriend Rogue, played by Anna Paquin, and Kitty Pryde, played here by Elliot Page, which goes absolutely nowhere. It's maybe the most unnecessary drama in the movie, and it doesn't even have a real payoff. Rogue is feeling insecure about not being able to touch Bobby physically when she hears about this new mutant cure, which can immediately preserve the human DNA of mutants while killing off the mutation. Rogue wants in on it, but doesn't really know how to tell the group.
I want to be able to touch people, Logan. A hug. A handshake.
And that's part of what I find so troubling about this movie as well. The X-Men could not be more disbanded at this point. Not on purpose, they just all have their own storylines going on and none of them seem to overlap. Now during all of this, Magneto, Pyro, and Mystique are recruiting some new talent for their Brotherhood of Mutants in the form of Callisto, Multiple Man, Kid Omega, and, of course,
the Juggernaut, bitch!
The plan is to locate the source of the cure, a young mutant called Leech, who's kind of an anti-mutant. He's a young kid whose ability is to reverse mutation. So naturally, the government is using his blood to make a serum that can supposedly cure mutants of their powers. Magneto and the new Brotherhood want to find Leech and stop the cure from being distributed.
They wish to cure us, but I say to you, we are the cure!
The X-Men, now without Cyclops because he just died, enlist the help of a genius-level mutant called Beast, played by Kelsey Grammer, who looks, sounds, and acts perfectly as this big blue Einstein.
As Churchill said, there comes a time when all men must... Oh, you get the point!
Seriously, I don't know what it is with Fox and blue mutants, but whenever they try to do a blue mutant, it looks amazing in these movies. Like, look at Mystique and Nightcrawler. But this cool stuff with Beast is ruined pretty quickly when Charles, Storm, and Logan find Jean and try to bring her back to her normal self. And then, Professor X dies. Well, not really, but we'll get into that. And you know what? It's not even earned. It's just as forced as Cyclops' ridiculous exit to this franchise. So, the X-Men are recruiting to help save Jean, who has joined Magneto's Brotherhood, and stop them from destroying the cure. It seems like everybody's just recruiting. That's like the entire movie is recruiting.
So, you have talents.
That and more.
You guys remember how Logan was kind of like the main character of the first movie? Well, he takes a backseat in this film along with almost everybody else. It's weird to see so many cool characters in this movie and almost none of them get any development. Beast is awesome, but he really only shows up for a few scenes. Juggernaut was exciting to see, although his character was just made to be a big dumb brute. And all the hype we get for Angel is completely deflated as he's literally useless in this movie. He's in like 3 scenes and says like 5 words and that's it.
I was told that this was a safe place for mutants.
However, while the story is all over the place and the characters are treated like disposable nothing superheroes and it's packed with bullshit like Iceman freezing a fountain so he can ice skate with Kitty, there's also a few things that deserve some praise upon this rewatch. For example, we get to see the Danger Room, a brief look at the Sentinels, and an amazing performance from Sir Ian McKellen, and even an interesting take on Wolverine's Berserker rage. Finally. Now, remember, true believers, the X-Men was always envisioned as a soap opera. Serialized stories about interpersonal relationships between students at a special school isn't that far off from any one of the teen dramas we grew up on. But here's the issue. The X-Men in these movies are just a blend of adults who are already in full control of their powers and kids who get no attention in the film, and all we get to tie them together is a few action scenes where the students and their teachers from Xavier's school work together to have a super-powered battle with other mutants. There isn't any writing dedicated to the individual characters. I would have liked to have seen some of the B-plots dropped from this movie in favor of giving more development to a character like Leech, who is a very interesting mutant in his own right, but also completely underused and underserved in the story. It pisses me off that we get more scenes where Bobby is low-key flirting with Kitty than we get of Angel and his interesting backstory. In the comics, Warren, or Angel, is the son of a billionaire who works in an anti-mutant research group, and he's ashamed of his gifts until Xavier and the X-Men help him love himself. In the movie, he's just a kid who hates his mutation when he's like 10, but then when the father tries to cure him later in his life, he just doesn't want to do it.
Wait. I can't do this.
But why? Could we not get like 5 extra minutes dedicated to this? It just seems kind of important. So throughout the movie, everybody is kind of split up, but it all culminates in a final battle that pits the Brotherhood against the humans and the X-Men against both of them. Again, there is some stuff to appreciate in this scene. We get to see Bobby turn into full Iceman, which is fun. We get to see Wolverine pop his claws and do some damage, which is always sick. And Beast finally gets some combat to contrast his otherwise fully composed character. Let your freak flag fly, Hank. We love you.
You realize the level of impact this will have on the mutant community?
Yes.
Jean by this point has been fully taken by the Phoenix persona, although none of her development happens on screen, of course. And Wolverine uses his ability to heal himself to stand up against her when no one else can, and ultimately he's forced to kill her with his claws in order to save everyone else from her raw power. Something that, again, would be nice to fully flesh out within the movie so that this scene doesn't come off as a completely silly resolution to a very real conflict. Way to go, boys. Way to go.
Maybe it's time for us to move on.
Magneto is shot with the cure and seemingly stripped of his powers, which brings the realization to him that he has messed up bad. He flees with the rest of the Brotherhood, and the day is officially saved. And oh yeah, I forgot to mention that Mystique is also cured of her abilities, and Magneto just drops her cold like halfway through the movie.
Such a shame. She was so beautiful.
Director Brett Ratner had brought us a final installment that didn't work for anyone. The film was poorly received for good reason by audiences, and the box office take, while being solid at over $400 million, was not matched in the film's underwhelming reviews.
Well, that's ridiculous.
For my money, the key to making a good X-Men movie is to spend time developing the long list of interesting characters and seeing them as individuals who are part of a collective team, as opposed to making a team-up movie where nobody has time to be seen or heard as a person. X-Men is all about inclusion and embracing diversity, yet this movie treats all mutants like generic teenagers who occasionally work with other generic teenagers to stop a threat. And that's just not what I, or many of you, want from an X-Men movie. This is proven by the franchise's later attempts to retcon this movie in favor of a prequel, sequel, spin-off series known widely as the First Class series, which tracks the same characters through a different timeline. It's a much better series, and some installments in it are way better than others, and this is something that we will undoubtedly be covering in the future, along with the Wolverine trilogy and New Mutants, eventually. Which, by the way, I do have some hot takes on those movies, and you are not going to want to miss that.
You know, sometimes when you cage the beast gets angry.
You have no idea.
X-Men: The Last Stand is too dumb to be considered dumb fun, and yet it's too dense to be considered a nothing movie. I think if you want to recreate the Phoenix Saga in live action ever again, maybe this time do it over like a limited series and dedicate the entire main storyline to that one plot. No more of this flip-floppy and convoluted stories, okay Marvel? Just give it to us the way we want it. The right way. Thank you all for watching this episode of Marvel Revisited, and we will see you next time.
Class dismissed.